Theology in 3 minutes. Topic: the ontological argument. The ontological argument doesn't begin with any proof or rationale. Instead, it takes a step back and defines what we're talking about first, because we can't agree if something exists if we can't even agree on what it is in the first place. So what does it mean for you to say God? And what does it mean to say that you believe in God? This question is often asked by contemporary author and clinical psychologist, Dr. Jordan Peterson. In his book, We Who Wrestle with God, he dissects biblical narratives to answer the question, how does one act out their beliefs, let alone their belief in God? So, what is God? Well, that depends on who you ask. Every culture and religion throughout history will give you a different answer. Unfortunately for polytheistic religions, the ontological argument can't help them, as the line between what is and isn't a God often blurs. The Eastern pantheistic religions have a much easier definition, that the ultimate God is existence itself. And if reality is real, and God is reality, then God is real. The ontology of God to them is rather straightforward. For the monotheistic religions, however, they define God as a distinct entity apart from creation. He therefore requires his own ontology, his own definition. So what is God to an Abrahamic religion? Well, they have their own rather well-known books on the subject, but the earliest form of the ontological definition for God comes from Saint Anselm in the 11th century, when he defined God as that than which nothing greater can be conceived. In this context, greater isn't just raw power, it also applies to benevolence, objectivity, morality, wisdom, purpose, and literally all other meaningful dimensions. This was then expanded upon by St. Thomas Aquinas, who took Anselm's definition for God and added another element to the discussion. To summarize, that which is real is superior to that which is mere concept. This seems rather straightforward. Eating real food is obviously superior than simply imagining food while starving to death. If you were to try and imagine the perfect anything, for example, the perfect pizza, clearly a real pizza is superior to an imaginary one. If you start with an idea in the mind, you can immediately conceive something greater. The same thing, but real. However, that also means that your so-called greatest imaginary pizza wasn't actually the greatest pizza. The real one is. So, if God's very definition is that of maximal superiority, then that applies to the parameter of being itself. God is by definition the greatest possible being, and being real is greater than being imaginary. Therefore, God by definition must be real. Now that being said, God isn't real in the same way that you or I are real. He is not necessarily a material entity, so materialistic objections against the ontological argument are fundamentally missing the point. A perfect pizza is only a perfect pizza insofar as what makes a pizza. But God isn't just perfect in one dimension or another, he is the apex of all perfection for perfection's sake. On the other hand, the ontological argument isn't a particularly strong standalone proof either. It draws its conclusions based on definitional necessity. It defines God as the greatest being, then draws conclusion that such a definition necessitates its own existence, insisting upon itself as the highest philosophical concept imaginable.